Hello, bore da, and welcome to Talking Wales. This week, obviously, we've been discussing the general election from a Welsh perspective and the policies that people are thinking about when they're actually coming to vote at the ballot box. Last week, we looked at education specifically, and this week we're looking at a topic that is bit of a hot topic during the election. It's the fourth most important topic that people consider when making their decision at the ballot box, according to statistics, and that is immigration. So we're joined today by Mynir Cwbys, who is joining us from the Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford. Mynir is a quantitative researcher whose primary interests lie at the intersection of migration, politics, and policy. His doctoral thesis focuses on the political effects of migration on democracies in Central and Eastern Europe. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're also joined by Joseph Gnagbo. Hello, Joseph. Bore da.
Bore da.
Joseph is chair of Cymdeithas yr Iaith, who came to Wales as an asylum seeker from Ivory Coast and now works as a language teacher and as a musician and composer. Is that correct, Joseph?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Croeso, bore da. And finally, Thomas Owen, who is deputy CEO of Oasis Cardiff. Their main aim and vision is to help refugees and asylum seekers integrate within their local community. They provide support for roughly 100 to 150 visitors each day from around the globe. This includes people from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, El Salvador, and Ivory Coast, among many other countries. Croeso, Thomas, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for joining us. Before we start the discussion, for those joining us who maybe don't know exactly what Talking Wales is about, here's a short video that just explains what Talking Wales is and what we're trying to achieve. We're building a community and we want you to be part of it. A news and information service designed to keep Welsh citizens informed, a space where issues that matter and impact our daily lives can be discussed, developing ideas and challenging those in power, sharing news and information via digital radio, YouTube, social media and online, using clear, understandable language, on the platforms you use most often. It'll be owned by you, our members, serving all of Wales and its people wherever they are in the world. Join us on our journey and help us create a better Wales. Thank you. Yeah, and if you visit talking.wales, you'll find at the moment we have a special general election voting tool that allows you to find out who your candidates are based on your postcode, but also it's taken in all the key points from all the main parties' manifestos, and based on your political views and opinions, it will give you an indication as to who you should be voting for. So give that a try, because you might find it interesting that who you intend to vote for and who you really should be voting for might be two completely different things. So again, before we start the discussion, I thought it was just important for us to get some context around the subject of immigration. So again, here's a short video we prepared that just gives us an overview of immigration and the situation as it currently is. Immigration has been a central issue during the past week of campaigning. But what are the facts that lie behind the statistics? The UK has experienced broadly similar levels of migration compared to other high-income countries on average over the past few decades, with people coming to study or work and their dependents making up the vast majority of those who have come to the UK. 40% of those who have come to the UK recently have come from India, Nigeria and China. The numbers coming on humanitarian grounds and seeking asylum have actually fallen. mainly due to a decrease of people coming from the Ukraine. Research shows that the impacts of migration on wages and employment prospects for UK-born workers are small. There is no single correct estimate of migrants' fiscal impact. Different studies make different assumptions, and not everyone will agree on what the best assumptions to make are. Studies examining the fiscal impact of migrants have produced different results, although in all cases the impacts have been estimated as less than plus 1% or minus 1% of GDP. Yeah, so again, that's giving us a bit of context there. So before we start the discussion, looking at why is immigration such a hot topic, just a reminder for anybody who's watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or X, formerly known as Twitter, you can join the discussion, share your comments, and we can share those with our guests, and because we want to hear your views as well. So maybe Minia, if we can come to you first, and can you just give us a bit of a context around the numbers? Because obviously this number of 600,000, we have the Labour, Conservatives and Reform all campaigning on the platform that immigration is too high. But there's very little sort of context as to why they say the figure is too high, and what the real numbers are. Because I touched on it in the video about students and people coming here to work. Because what was interesting, from a Welsh perspective, Reform decided to launch their manifesto or contract with the people in Merthyr Tydfil, which was an interesting place for them to do that. So how many people are actually coming to the UK, and for what reasons, and where are they coming from?
Of course. Now, I think it's indisputable that in the last couple of years, migration to the UK has been at record levels. So last year, in 2023, net migration, which is the number of people moving in, immigrating to the UK long term minus the ones leaving, the immigrants, that number has been around 685,000 people moving to the UK last year. That was a drop compared to the year before. So in 2022, we saw the highest number on record. We saw 765,000 almost coming to the UK. Now, we've seen that bit of a decline, but we're still seeing very, very high levels. Now, for a bit of context, before the pandemic, net migration was at levels around 250,000 a year. So we've gone up a fair bit from that. And of course, we all remember political debates about 10 years ago, where there was a lot of talk about bringing net migration down to the tens of thousands. And of course, that hasn't happened. Now, as for why have we seen these numbers increase, and who's actually coming? I think the most important thing to say, as you said yourself, Hugh, is that the vast majority of these people are coming into the UK legally. We've seen so much debate going on about illegal migration to the UK, and that's an important issue on its own. But the vast majority of people coming to the UK are doing so legally. And in fact, most of the increase we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years has been non-EU citizens and their dependents coming to the UK for work and study. So that's been most of the increase we've seen in the last few years.
And do we know, with people who are coming to study, how many of those are then staying on or seeking? Because again, you can't just stay; you have to apply for a work visa. So how does that number fluctuate? So obviously, you've got people coming in to study, then you've got people finishing studies and then going home. Do we know more about that number?
Now, in general, you're right. That is the pattern that we've seen historically. People do come in to study, stay on for a few years, finish their degree. And generally, we've seen most of them then leave the UK after 2 or 3 years. Now, there's a bit of discussion to be had about whether that's going to continue to be the case in the future. We do have some initial evidence that shows more students are staying in the UK than before. And a big part of that is going to be the government's introduction of a new graduate visa route in 2021, which allows international students to stay on in the UK for 2 or 3 years after graduation and have the right to work here, and eventually, if they manage to remain here, settle in the UK.
And is it correct to say that I think it's just under half of all immigration involves London and the southeast? I think it's 48%. I think London's 35, southeast 13%. So it's concentrated in one area, whereas in Wales, the actual number of people coming to Wales from outside the UK is very, very small.
That is in fact correct. We do see large concentrations of migrants in London and the southwest more broadly. In Wales, the number of immigrants has been well below the UK average in recent years. So our best estimates right now of just to the foreign-born population are those based on the 2021 census a couple of years ago. And there we saw the UK average be somewhere around 16%. So 1 in 6 people in Britain born abroad, whereas in Wales, the percentage was much smaller, just under 7%, if I recall.
Joseph, if I can come to you as somebody who came to Wales as an asylum seeker, can you just tell us a little bit about your journey and the experience of coming here and how and why?
Yeah, I left the Ivory Coast in 2011 after the war, because there was a war in 2011 in Ivory Coast, and something interesting about that war is that there was involvement of foreign powers in the war there, and I happened to be on the wrong side, and the rebels. It was a war between the rebels and government, and then I was supporting the government there. And then the rebels won the war because of the support they received from outside, especially France and the US. And then, so I left because I was threatened. I was a big voice. Then I went to Ghana first by road, and then from there I took a plane. By air, I went to Morocco. I stayed in Morocco for 6 years. Then in Morocco also was not really safe, so I had an opportunity to come to the UK, and that was in 2017. And I came to the UK and applied. So already I was a refugee in Morocco before coming to the UK. Then I came to the UK and applied again for asylum. And from London, I was moved to Wales, my home office. Yeah. So, well, that's how I found myself in Wales. Yeah, but I'm basically an activist. I was an activist back in Ivory Coast, and I was also a singer. Came up with a rap song that was on air, that was on YouTube. And that's why I was easily recognizable. And yes, so that's what brought me. Yeah.
And how, going back to 2017, how easy was that process to apply for asylum in the UK?
Well, from London, I just went to Croydon. In London, I went to Croydon, and I called the Home Office, and then I went to Croydon to provide all the documents they wanted, and then it was quite easy, yeah. But through the process of moving you from one place to another, it's a whole new journey. You don't know what's going to happen. Total uncertainty. Living in hostels, until you find yourself in Wales. And I was asking along the process. I was asking people, what is Wales like? How are the people there? Yeah, but I had good feedback from people saying that people are nice in Wales. And then I came here, and then I think they were right, because my integration was very easy. Yeah, it was very quick.
And how long did the process take from start to finish, from the application and then having your sort of asylum claim agreed to?
I have to say I was one of the lucky ones, because I applied in March, and I arrived in Wales in February, but I applied in October 2017, and then I arrived in Wales in 2018, March, and then from there, I in September 2018, I got the status to stay here. So it was quite long, like it's quite short, sorry, like a year. Yeah.
Yeah. But during that period, you weren't able to work or.
Oh yeah, exactly. No chance. It was not possible to work. Maybe as a volunteer, you could. Yeah, because I knew a couple of refugees were, asylum seekers were volunteering. The thing I was most interested in was education, and I didn't have access to education at that time. I don't know. I hear that it has. There's a way now, but as far as I know, I don't know if it's possible. Education is very important. So I was kind of vegetating. Well, luckily, I was offered the opportunity to learn the Welsh language, and I had a lot of time on my hands. So I really took advantage. I really made the most of it.
That's great. Wyt ti rwan yn cadeirydd ar Cymdeithas yr Iaith?
Yeah, I do.
Mae'n siŵr bod hwnna'n brofiad oeddech chdi ddim yn disgwyl yn ôl yn Côte d'Ivory 10 mlynedd yn ôl.
O gwbl, ac dwi'n newydd gael fy nghyhwyd i'r Eisteddfod i gael fy urso fel aelod o Cylch.
So just to explain, so with the National Eisteddfod every year honours people and for their contribution to Wales and the Welsh language, and Joseph is going to be ordained into the Order of the Bards at Pontypridd this summer. So I'll be there. I'll be cheering you on when I'm there. I haven't been. They haven't asked me. I don't know why. But anyway, that's another story. So Thomas, if I can come to you as somebody who works, and obviously you sort of meet people like Joseph on a daily basis. How do you find, especially now, compared with Joseph's experience of 7 years ago, the process and the time and how people are dealing with that uncertainty?
Yeah, I think it's certainly become a lot more difficult, and I think Joseph's case is probably the exception nowadays. With waiting lists can be, you can be waiting sort of 3 to 4 years at the moment. There was quite a push by the Home Office to reduce the amount of time waiting at the end of 2023, but the waiting list again is back up to 100,000 already. So it's really difficult. And as Joseph touched on, that time spent waiting for the asylum claim to be decided is really difficult. And you can apply to work if you've been waiting more than 12 months, but you're really limited in those jobs that you can apply to. And they would just be the jobs that are on the shortage occupation list. So it can be really, really difficult. At Oasis, what we really try and encourage people to do is get involved in volunteering and education. So whether that be English language or Welsh language as well, like Joseph touched on.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Minia, sorry, can you remind us how we pronounce your name again?
It's Minia.
Minia. Right, I will get it down by the end of the thing. So, as with the Migration Observatory, I shared earlier on social media sort of links to the statistics you have. You obviously get a lot of people inquiring, people like us asking about information. So, what are you finding from people coming to the Migration Observatory? What are the questions they're asking you around migration? So, why do you think it's become such a hot topic?
Look, I think the main difficulty with how complex and how heated at times the immigration debate has become in the UK is exactly being able to tell the difference between the real issues on the ground and what is oftentimes more of a headline driven political narrative. So making sure that the whole discussion is anchored in facts and in evidence is perhaps one of the biggest challenges that we see.
Thomas, I see you nodding there. Why do you think that immigration has become such a hot topic? As I say, it's the fourth in the list of topics people consider essential. Education is down around 10th, and I remember, going back to when I was sort of starting to vote in the 80s, and education was up there, but now immigration is this topic that people are talking about.
I don't think there's any simple answer, but we've seen in elections gone by that there's always a scapegoat, and in elections gone by that would be people that were claiming benefits or abusing the system. And this election cycle, it seems that the scapegoats are people that are coming into the country. As Minio touched on, I think the headlines are very much about channel crossings, and as you mentioned, that's only a very small proportion of the people that are actually coming into the country. But I think the channel crossings, because they are that much more visible, it's something that people can really jump on, essentially. So yeah, it's really dominating the election at the moment.
And Joseph, how are you with the general election campaign now? Is it something that you're hearing people talking about? Are people asking you about your experiences?
Yeah, well, it's not only in the UK that what happens. I mean, that's what has been happening for decades now in Europe in general. Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of I mean, politicians play a lot on perception. Perception is key, and you have on one side people who talk about the bad aspects of immigration, trying to link it to security, jobs, criminality, terrorism, and on the other side you have those who say that migration is great, comes and make the population younger, and everything is good with migration. So there's that game between politicians, but perception is difficult for the public to understand, to really get the right, I mean, the balanced perception about it. If I take the example of migration in Africa, you have, for example, like intra-Africa migration, which is I mean, compared to African Europe migration, which is only 1/3, of the African, less than a third of Africans who go to Europe. Most of Africans migrate within Africa, and it is increasingly more and more people migrating within Africa than going to Europe. And then if you take the general migration stock, you see that Africa represents only 15%, less than 15% of migrant population in the world, and then you have, like in Europe, 22%. So it is really, but how many people will get to know that, will understand that if they don't do the research, or they don't have access to the right information. So I think there's a lot of game on perception. Yeah, but in general, I would say that the politics in Wales is really it hasn't been polluted by those manipulations too much. So there's I think in Wales there's a good attitude. I mean, a positive attitude of the government towards migration, and people can calmly try to understand the issue and debate calmly about it.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting for people, from who are watching us from outside Wales and maybe don't know about Wales, is Vaughan Gething was recently elected as leader of Labour in Wales, and is now the First Minister, and is the first Black First Minister or leader of any government in Europe. And the Welsh government, the Welsh Labour government, with support of other parties, have made Wales a sort of a nation of sanctuary. Thomas, if I can just come to you from a Welsh perspective, because I think immigration within Wales itself is quite sort of complex, because we have Cardiff and Newport, which have two of the oldest sort of migrant communities in the UK. Historically, I believe that Cardiff has the largest Somalian community outside of Somalia, for example. But go beyond, the cities of Cardiff, Newport, and Swansea, we see fewer people who look different to us. So Wales is a place where the majority of the people are white and Welsh, basically. How do you think that plays in on people's views on migration? in Wales?
I think always will be quite a lot. I think, in those more rural areas where, like you mentioned, it is white Welsh communities, I think not being exposed to other cultures and other religions will definitely play into that. I think in Wales, for example, particularly with asylum seekers, they've only ever been housed in the 4 major cities, and that has meant those concentrations are there. And as you mentioned, the old Tiger Bay, which is now Cardiff Bay, was a key port and a key source of migrants coming into Cardiff. So I think it really does play into it, and I think you see that really when the election results come out, that the cities tend to be more left-leaning, whereas the rural areas tend to be pushed more towards conservative. So it definitely does play a part. But I think Wales in general is an incredibly welcoming place for migrants. As you touched on, the Welsh government have been really pushing the nation of sanctuary vision and wanting Wales to be a welcoming place for all. So yeah, to answer your question, I think that rural city divide really does play into those perceptions.
Yeah.
If I may,
Sorry, yeah, I was going to bring you in then now. Yeah, sorry.
Perfect. No, I really appreciate Tomas bringing in this urban-rural divide, because I think that's one of the most interesting things we see both in Wales and across the UK, is that although there's all these legitimate and varied concerns that people have with immigration in their local communities, in the end, it is people in the areas that have received most immigrants, like the big cities, like the Southeast, that tend to be more positive about immigration. And opposition to immigration is oftentimes concentrated in lower income areas that actually receive many, many fewer immigrants, which on the one hand can indicate that the issue is also anxieties triggered by rapid change, as in certain small local areas, but also that immigration can get caught up in a wider range of grievances in these areas.
Yeah, so I'll come back to you now shortly. So it's the numbers, and I think this is something that I think it's important for people to understand. And I'll come back to you now, Mineia, is, why have they increased in recent years? And what do the projections suggest?
Look, there's a variety of reasons why we've seen an increase in migration. Of course, some of it has been out of control of the government, say the inflows coming from Ukraine and Hong Kong. But it's essential that we realize most of this increase in the last couple of years has been driven by rather intentional changes in policy. So it was actually the UK government relaxing its policies towards migration very intentionally that led to the increase. And there's 3 things there. One, the increase in international students, which was driven by the government's 2019 international education strategy, which committed to doubling the number of international students until 2030. We've already seen that happen in just a few years. They've introduced the new graduate visa route to make the UK more attractive. We've seen the same thing in work visas. We've seen a liberalization, especially in the care sector, but also health and skilled workers more generally. And then, of course, we've seen the introduction of these rather large humanitarian schemes in response to international crisis for Ukraine, Hong Kong, and beyond. So these were very intentional changes in policy that have been behind the increase in migration.
And I think it was, again, preparing for today's broadcast, I was looking at research into the challenges facing the health service, for example. What we hear from parties like Reform is this claim that public services are under pressure, sort of hospitals are under pressure because of uncontrolled immigration. Whereas when you actually look at what the issues are facing the health service, it's an aging population. I think it's correct to say that as a percentage, people who come to the UK are younger than the UK population at large. people are living longer, so we got more older people. People who follow me on social media will know that I've been in and out of hospital the last 5 years with surgery. And what my sort of lived experience of being in a hospital in Bridgend was being on a ward with white Welsh people being treated, but being treated very, very well by people from all over the world who've got that expertise and experience. And I think this is something that, again, this is something, you may have personal opinions on this perception that, health is under pressure because of immigration. Why do you think there isn't a pushback on the narrative and the facts around that? Who'd like to come in there?
Certainly happy to come in there.
Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's something called the NHS surcharge for a lot of migrants that come into the country. So actually, those coming in are paying quite a large sum of money normally for access to the NHS. So it's always a real shame to see that migrants are made as the scapegoat for issues with the NHS. I think it's the complexity in terms of why it's not being addressed fully. I think, like we've touched on this whole thing, it's immigration is talked about in the round, and it's much more complex than that. And there's various factors going on. As you mentioned, Hugh, I think if we completely stopped migration to the UK, the NHS would be suffering far worse than if we did have migration, because ultimately, so many people come to this country to work for the NHS and do an incredible job of it. I think just in this election cycle, it's dominating a lot of the conversations, and there hasn't really been that sort of in-depth discussion about immigration. It's just trying to get those headlines and the clickbait messages coming through. But generally, I think there has been some discussion around, although politicians are saying that we need to get immigration down, there would be exemptions. And I think some of the parties have touched on the fact that those exemptions would include healthcare workers.
Joseph, what's your feeling on this as an issue with people using things like, sort of almost false equivalents of using statistics that don't exist to try and, sort of make a political case with health, for example?
Yeah, I think health is key for every human being, and if you want to trigger when politicians want to trigger, incite fear, or incite hostility, I think it's a very powerful tool. Yeah, this talking about, linking it the issues with health, access to job, of course, is important, but access to health is really key. So I think, that's the same logic behind it. Yeah, how to incite fear, how to create concern and anxiety. I definitely think, that's the same logic. Yeah, to me.
Minya, again, on the same thing.
Sorry. Yeah, I wanted to point something out regarding the increase of immigration in UK in general. I don't know if it explains that, but what I mean is that we shouldn't forget that the world population is increasing, and the immigration around the world, not only in the UK, the level of immigration increases with the growth of the world population. So the more people are there in the world, the more there are people in the world, the more migration there is. Yeah. So they're just talking about, what you were discussing right before. So it's not only in the UK; it has increased like everywhere, in other European countries, and in Africa, and in the UK, in the US, even in Asia. It tends to increase, with the global population increase also. Yeah.
So how, going on that point, Minya, how does the UK, because, and again, this is interesting, we're having a discussion from a Wales perspective, the UK numbers, because obviously people, forget sometimes that the UK, 84% of the UK is, the population is England. I think Scotland is 8, and we're six or something, in that area. So how does this impact, obviously from a UK perspective, but also the rest of, as Joseph mentioned, the rest of Europe? Is it something that is similar in other countries?
I think the UK generally tends to be middle of the pack compared to its European peers on many of the issues we've seen come up in recent years. So in terms of our foreign-born population, tend to be on similar levels to some European countries and also to the US. We've seen fewer immigrants over the long term than places like Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. Of course, then across the world, you have some exceptions to the trend. You have very low immigration countries in Asia, like South Korea or Japan. But generally, the UK tends to be not very remarkable, and it is, as Tomas and Joseph have mentioned, it is something that we're seeing across the board, and it is also an issue politically in many, if not all, European countries. And while some of the reasons for this are similar, there's also a lot of very specific ways in which immigration interacts with the local context, and especially the political dynamics in the country.
So just picking up on that point, is obviously France is a country now with the European Commission elections, France returning a larger percentage of what people would consider as sort of right or far right parties. But again, from context point of view, turnout was relatively low, and I think it was like 30%. So it's not as if the whole of France has gone in that direction. But obviously, the reaction there is to call a general election in order to to try and sort of call that out. So with someone like France, for example, what's driving it there, would you say?
Well, I think the political situation in France has many elements to it, but with regards to immigration, and that's a case in France, it's a case in Britain and beyond. I think there's a very interesting asymmetry when it comes to immigration as a political issue, because there's a lot of parties, especially on the right, that see it as a relatively low cost and easy way to mobilize their supporters, to mobilize their voters. And I say asymmetry because opposition to immigration tends to be concentrated among more rural, older voters. And that's exactly the voter base of many right-wing parties. So it's easy to see how there's an incentive there to raise the salience of immigration in order to mobilize your base. And on the other end of the political spectrum, where you see higher support for immigration among the left, it doesn't do the same to mobilize their supporters. So the incentives are a bit asymmetric in that sense.
And I think just from a Welsh perspective, Thomas and Joseph, be interesting to hear your views. It's interesting in Wales, the dynamic when we talk about migration, of migration of people from England to Wales, specifically English people moving into what are traditionally Welsh speaking communities, and the impact that is having on communities. Not just the cultural impact, but obviously the financial impact, because obviously if you're selling a house in London, what you're buying in Wales, you get more bang for your buck, and it has having an impact on that. Do you see that playing out in Wales? We have some Welsh nationalist parties that are further to the right who campaign quite heavily on sort of English immigration as an issue. What do you think about that?
Look, I'm not sure how much that will have an impact in this election. It will be interesting. I think there was certainly more people moving to Wales, particularly after the COVID pandemic, when there was a lot more working from home and people realised that they might want more outdoor space, which we're blessed with a lot of that in Wales. It's going to be interesting. It'll be the first election really post the pandemic. I'm not sure of the exact figures of the number of English people that do move to Wales, but yeah, it could be interesting to see how that plays out.
Because it was quite interesting with the Brexit votes that obviously Wales voted for Brexit, and the majority was only 80,000, which is basically the population of Wrexham. But fingers were pointed that it was English people who'd moved in, Whereas the reality of that was, when you look at places like the South Wales valleys, where a third of Wales people live, they voted quite heavily in favour of Brexit, and those are the areas that people identify most as being Welsh. So, Joseph, obviously, from Cymdeithas point of view, it's something that is being campaigned on, and it is, one of the central issues around, the impact that migration is having on Welsh language communities. Do you think that is something that people are thinking about when at this election, or is it something more for the Senedd election in 2 years' time?
Okay, I'm sorry. I've been able to barely hear you. I don't know. There's something with the sound.
No, we're just discussing from migration within Wales. Within English people moving into Welsh-speaking communities.
Yeah, I can hear you better now. Yeah, well, the concern about the Welsh community is especially regarding the housing market. When the houses are treated as a property rather than home, that it becomes a problem. So it's a question that has to do with the laws and the laws in place, regarding buying a house, a second house, third house. So that's the concern. It's not people migrating, really. No, it is the way the economy around housing is organized. That's the concern, because it kind of destructures the community, because people cannot afford houses, and they don't get jobs, and then they have to migrate. They have to leave their communities, and if you lose the people who are the speakers of the language, who are members of as members of the community, who really promote the culture, who have the culture inside of them, in their blood. If you let them go, if they leave the communities, then we're losing in terms of language and culture. And if you don't save the communities, but you can't save the language, you can't save the culture. So that's very important to us, not destructuring, not killing the communities. Yeah. So it has to do a lot with agriculture too. They also have that concern too. Agriculture, they really want to have access to the land and grow the food and feed, and save the activity at least. Yeah. So it's not really people moving; it's the laws in place. Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of this episode. And I think it's a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure you can all agree we could be talking about this for hours. But it's I'm really grateful for your contributions and your knowledge, and especially because you all have experience and expertise in the area. So before we go, just as a final sort of discussion point, how do you think we can change the narrative around immigration? So I'll come to Minea first. What do you think? What can be done to change the narrative and get people to understand the facts behind the headlines?
Look, I think it's important to understand that at least part of the current narrative, the fact that we do have a heated debate, at least part of that is reflective of genuine concerns on both sides of the debate. And having this debate and this narrative is to some extent an essential part of our democracy. But if I were to pick one thing that's important to change, is probably that we need to ensure that we acknowledge how complex the issues at hand are, and the fact that there are no simple and straightforward solutions to them. And I think oftentimes that gets lost in the narrative. And one example would be, so a lot of the focus in the UK debate is on absolute numbers. Is migration too high or too low? And that's actually rather unusual on an international scale, because in other places it tends to be more about who's coming, why are they coming, about the composition of migration. And actually, when you ask people in the UK, is migration too high, you're going to get a majority saying yes. But if you go into that and ask, do we have too many international students? Are there too many care workers or doctors coming in? People are actually supportive of maintaining or even increasing levels of immigration in there. And I think that illustrates the trade-offs that we face as a nation when it comes to immigration.
Yeah, because again, statistically, it shows that the majority of people are actually in favour of most forms of migration. It's one specific type of migration, and again, it's the one that's one of the smallest bits of migration, but it's also one of the key parts of the narrative. Thomas, how do you think we can change the narrative around immigration?
I think Minnie is spot on there. I think I would add, just a more balanced debate. I think there's not enough conversation about the positive effects of immigration. I think that really needs to come into it. But on the small focus that you mentioned, that generally is those coming over the channel, I think we need to look back to the roots of why Britain signed up to the Refugee Convention in 1951, and there were legitimate reasons for that off the back of World War II, that essentially countries said, never again. We need a system in place that supports individuals when they're fleeing war or persecution, and essentially gives them sanctuary. And I think that's been forgotten quite a lot, and it's been seen more and more as a negative. But I think remembering the reasons why we signed up to that convention in the first place would be helpful.
Yeah. And Joseph, before we hear your final words, I think it was quite interesting. I was listening yesterday to the anniversary commemorations of the Windrush arrivals. I wasn't aware that the people who came on the Windrush, that 75% were ex-military RAF, people from the RAF, and unlike sort of people in the UK where they were conscripted, those people were volunteers, and they volunteered to come to fight in the Second World War for the motherland, as it was known then, and they would have had to come on transport ships where there was a 1 in 4 chance that they would be killed by a German U-boat sinking those ships. So it's incredible to think that those people who volunteered and made that huge sacrifice and volunteered to come here, and without those people, we wouldn't be in the situation we are now. But I think it's interesting, it's really important that we remember from history. So that's just something that I picked up on yesterday. So Joseph, as a last word, how do you think we can sort of change the narrative?
Yeah, I think you said a key word is aware. I wasn't aware of. Yeah, so I think there's something missing about democracy, about our democracy. Yeah, is that the level of involvement and awareness of the citizens is really lacking. Most people are busy doing their own thing. I mean, going to work and making money to make sure they make a living. But we need more involvement of citizens in the politics, in political issues, so they understand what is going on. Because it has kind of been a divide. There's kind of a divide, between a gap between a ruling class, politicians who have access to information and they know everything, and then the population who's there busy doing their own thing and listening to them, just listening. But if there's more involvement, they will understand. I'll give you an example. Recently, last year, the government of Wales came up with a scheme for refugees and asylum seekers to take the bus for free bus. But then sometimes there were challenges, because some drivers will refuse out of lack of information, and sometimes deliberately too. So they did not share the government vision, on that, because of lack of communication. Yeah, but if it's a democratic decision, then there will be every layer of the society will be informed, will know what is going on, and will be involved, and then it will be successful. So they had to stop it, because instead of creating, even doing something great, good for humanity on the humanitarian perspective, it caused more problems. Yeah. So that's just an example, just to say that if the people are more involved in politics, in democracy, they will understand the issues better, and then it will be hard. It will be more difficult for politicians to come with fake narratives, and this kind of things. Yeah.
Diolch. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here with Talking Wales. But I think especially Joseph, diolch for the work you're doing. The fact that you've raised so much awareness around the work of Cymdeithas yr Iaith is testament to the positive contribution that comes from people coming to Wales with experiences and knowledge of other cultures as well. It's a huge benefit to us. So diolch fawr iawn. Thank you to Thomas, Joseph, and Minea. Sorry, I mangled your name. But hopefully you can join us again in the future. But diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much.
So, wow.
Thank you.